key attributes of quadratic functions. We have certain ones that we're going to look for. The first one is our rocks. Now remember, all of these words mean the same thing on a graph. So this is our roots, zeros, that's the O, x-intercepts, and solutions. So this is where it crosses the x-axis. So if we have our graph, this is where it's crossing the x-axis. That's what those rocks are. The vertex is the middle point of the graph. It's always the maximum or minimum of the graph. So the way that looks on a graph is if we have our grid and then we draw our parabola, the vertex is this center point. The way we find that on the calculator is we graph in a new document and then we press menu 6, 8, 2, and that will tell us our vertex if we're on the calculator. Our y-intercept is where our graph crosses the y-axis. So if we're looking at our grid and we have our parabola, our y-intercept is here where it crosses the y-axis. And then lastly, our axis of symmetry cuts the graph in half. Our axis of symmetry is always going to be an equation that is x equals some number. But it will always be x equals because it will cut the graph straight down the middle. So if we go look at this graph, it's going to cut it right down the middle. That's going to be maybe x equals -3. That's the line that makes it symmetrical on both sides. So let's look at our first question. It says, what is the y-intercept of this graph? So there's lots of points labeled, but there's not one labeled where the y-intercept is. So we're looking at the y-axis. Where does the graph cross here, which is 4? So this would be one that you would have to grid on a griddable sheet. The next one says, which one describes the axis of symmetry? So if I were to draw a line again that would cut this graph in half, I would draw it straight down the middle here, and that would be going through number 2. X equals 2. Remember, it's always x equals a number. On the next one, it says, what is the maximum value of this graph? So if I were to find the very maximum value, that would be the highest point. So we look where that crosses through, and that is 9. Lastly, this graph says, what are the zeros of f? So remember, the zeros are the same thing as the roots, x-intercepts, and solutions, which is where it crosses this x-axis. So I can see there are 2 zeros, so A and C are not possible. I can also tell that the first one crosses somewhere between 0 and 1, and somewhere between, so this is going to be a number between 0 and 1. And then this one is going to be a number between 1 and 2. 2 and 9 can't be the answer because 9 would be way out here and 2 is here. It doesn't cross through those points. So the only possible answer is D. 1/3 would be this one that's in between 0 and 1, and 3/2 is equal to 1 1/2. That would be there between 1 and 2.